No, he wasn't.
Welcome, everyone, to the October 26th Eugene City Council work session. Welcome to everybody here and at home. We have a couple really good items for discussion today, and the first one up is the street preservation project. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll turn it over to Kurt and his team to give the presentation.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity to be here today. We actually have a two-part discussion. The first is going to be from our city engineer, Mark Schoening, talking about where we stand with the current bond measure, and then subsequent to that, I'm going to take a few minutes and visit with you about next steps. So I'll start with Mark.
Okay, thank you. So just as way of background, the bond measure to fix streets was passed in November 2008 at $35.9 million, or roughly $6.5 million annually for 5 years. 32 specific streets were identified for repair as part of that bond measure, and the voter pamphlet states that the council will authorize any additional streets should there be funds remaining after those 32 specific streets are completed. In the resolution that put the bond measure on the ballot, there was the intent to form, and there was formed, a street repair review panel, and the charge of that group was to prepare a report separate and distinct from the report prepared by the outside auditor, documenting the city's use of bond proceeds and noting whether the bond proceeds were used in compliance with the terms of this resolution. And we've also used that group to identify additional streets beyond the 32 that were initially part of the bond measure. So there's two members. I'll read all the panel members. Two are here, Jim Wilcox and Janet Calvert. The other members are Howie Bonet, Steve Lee, Gary Wildish, Paul Hobo, Dan Brown, Paul Adkins, John Borofsky, Bob Klein, Clayton Walker, and Bruce Mulligan. And that group represents a pretty broad cross-section of the community, and they have to date reviewed 2 years of bond measure implementation, and that has been reported to the city manager and to the council. And then we'll do that again for this third year of construction later this fall and early into next year. And it's a group that's got a strong interest and a solid knowledge in pavement preservation that's just continued to grow over the last several years. So the action being requested of the council today is approval of additional street preservation projects for the proceeds that will remain after the 32 streets identified in the bond measure are completed. And this is the second time that we've made this request for the council, to the council. On May 11th of this year, the council approved 7 additional streets with an estimated cost of a little over $6.5 million. And then at that May meeting, we stated that the Street Repair Review Panel wanted to have a more robust discussion with a much larger list of projects to select from for the funds remaining after the additional streets were approved. And so on May 24th, we met with the Street Repair Review Panel and reviewed 33 streets. I had misstated in the EIS it was 28, but it was 33 streets totaling $28 million. And that's shown as attachment A to your agenda item summary. And so the Street Repair Review Panel had a discussion on the criteria that they would consider in selecting a short list from that group of $28 million, and also asked for the staff recommendation. And we had developed a recommendation following the criteria in the bond measure, which the one area of change for the Street Repair Review Panel is the bond focused on reconstructs, and the Street Repair Review Panel wanted to focus on overlays because of they're a more cost-effective long-term solution to maintaining streets. So with that, they removed one street that was a reconstruct, 7th place, and then added several streets that were overlays, and reached consensus on that list, and that's shown as attachment B to your agenda item summary. And then that group was further broken into, that list of streets was further broken into 2 groups. The first group totaled about $5 million, and that's again shown on that attachment B. And that was the group that we felt pretty comfortable that we would have that much remaining money to complete that group of projects. And then the second group was about $2.25 million, and that was a group that we felt there'd likely be enough money, but there may not be, in that if there wasn't, we would supplement the that funding with the capital fund that is derived from the local gas tax. So, so the intent was, providing that council approves the list as recommended, that we would do both groups, Group 1 and Group 2, and it's likely the bond measure would fund all of Group 1, or highly likely, and then likely that it would fund all of Group 2, but if not, we would complete that work with the local gas tax. And then, as we stated last spring, the importance of moving forward at this time is that there's quite a bit of work that goes into designing projects, a lot of coordination with the local utilities, eWeb and Northwest Natural, and even with our own maintenance folks that operate and maintain the city's wastewater and stormwater systems to give them plenty of leeway or lead time to do the work they need to do on their utilities in advance of the pavement preservation. And again, the goal would be to get all these streets in construction in the summer of 2013. So again, the action being requested is to approve that additional streets as shown on attachment B, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on that request.
So we thought it might be most useful to dispose of the motion you had on the first part of this before we
Went into the second
next
part.
steps, if that's your pleasure.
Okay. Any discussion on this?
So thank you for coming forth and sharing this with us. It's good to know that the money that we ask from the taxpayers is going to good work and getting drawn out. It seems like we're getting a lot of bang for the buck, to use that phrase. But I was just curious, has there been any conversation, or has the group, or has your department looked at what we're doing with Blair? That's an awfully pitted street, and it just really needs some work. And is it was it on the list that I didn't see?
It's one of the original of the 32 streets. Right. So what you have in front of you is the
It's just the additions.
additional streets. So Blair is one of the 32 that were in the initial bond measure.
Okay, so where could we, maybe later on, you can just kind of update me on that. We don't need to.
Yeah, it'll either be in next summer or the following summer. We're still pursuing a grant to do some pedestrian improvements along Blair.
Okay.
So if we get that grant, that would push it out to 2013. If not, we would try to get it done next summer.
Okay, because I know the community there really has some issues around, it's, not safe to bike, kind of, have some. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think there's a part of the work that's being done right now on getting people out on the bike and ped, to look at the bike and ped plan includes some of the work for that street, I think. So. All right, George Poling and then Alan.
Yeah, I just would like to thank the Street Repair Review Panel for the work that they've done in looking at this in a real solid way and coming up with the recommendations they came up with. You're looking at the original list of additional streets, and it's hard to say no to any of them. So, the prioritizing, I think, is the toughest part, and I think they deserve, our gratitude for all the hard work they've done. And also, I think a little thanks needs to go to make sure we're addressing the street repairs. I mean, it's been a hot topic around the council for many, many years. I was skeptical at first about the 5 years now and 5 years later, and I wanted to go for the more comfortable about the splitting it up into 2 5-year increments. And this is getting into the second part. But, with the economic times the way that they are right now, I think it's going to be a harder sell than we've had in the past. But I think with the track record that we're showing of the work that we've done and how we're spending the money, I think that's to a big advantage to us in the maybe an upcoming bond measure election in the near future. But I'm pleased with the additional street recommendations as presented in the attachment B. I think they're great decisions.
I just sort of like to add to that I think it was really smart of this body to not only want to spread it throughout all the different wards, but to sort of depoliticize it by having that outside committee help do the prioritization too. So I think that's been a really smart thing to do. Alan.
Yeah, I also like to thank staff for the hard work they've done on this project and getting this all together, and also the panel. I know that they met several times, and so, they did a good job of getting us to this point. I like it when we get this nice little package of non-controversial recommendations. So, so this is just for the monies that we have saved so far, and we still have 2 years left. So there's a potential that we could, if prices stay down, that we could get another round of these.
No, that's not quite right. It's anticipating where we're going to be at the end,
Okay.
so that we start now and have enough time to design and coordinate with utilities to get everything constructed by construction in 2013.
Okay, so are you assuming some savings on the next set of...
Right, part of it's carrying forward some conservative assumptions on what construction prices will be the next couple of years.
So there's data, but
Right.
we already actually...
Right, what we actually
bank
have,
saved,
right, exactly.
Good, good. One of the projects in here is the Alder one from 18th to 24th, which I mentioned the other day. I took that bike ride and went on Alder Street near the university campus area where they have the really innovative new bike track, which has with a buffered parking. And in part, this will continue that, not exactly like in that fashion, but continue that whole bike path down to from 18th to 24th, and trying to get that corridor going from north to south, crisscrossing the town. And I think that's kind of the example of what we're trying to do in other places. So, so far, I think it's been working really well, and so that'll be then kind of the poster child project for how do we do that going forward. So I think that's in here as one of the projects. That's great. The council does deserve some credit for putting this out for 5 years. But there's also part 2 of this that the Council Committee on Transportation Funding came up with. This was only part of it. We still have an enormous backlog of street repair that we have to do, and this just kind of keeps our head above water and nips away just a tiny bit at that backlog, but it's still way over $200 million. And and we have talked about bringing back that next phase of it to get some more funding to nip away at that backlog, because we're never going to get there at this rate, and it'll just continue to grow actually after we don't renew this one. So I'm kind of asking, when are we going to bring back that conversation and have that evolution of those ideas, which are getting a little stale at this point?
Okay. Once we get beyond this decision on adding the projects, then we'll talk a little bit about next steps on re-upping this bond measure. The other conversations are obviously still on the table. The backlog is, I think, actually about $139 million right now. So
Plus the unimproved streets.
yeah, and so as we go ahead, I think we need to acknowledge that we're making progress, but there's work to be done, and so while we celebrate the successes, we need to continue the strategic planning side of it. As far as the concept of, for example, the transportation system maintenance fee, you might recall that when we last visited that, it was for lack of a billing system that one of the key blockages in the critical path to getting that is this board and the eWeb board working together on some of those topics. So I think that's probably still the status of that today, but I don't think I would characterize that as having been put on the shelf. I think as we look at 10 to 20 years of where we need to go with street maintenance in Eugene, we're making a little progress, but there will be other components to that beyond our bond measure and gas tax in the years ahead.
Right.
Not really prepared to give you a big update on that piece today.
But I just want to keep that on the table and make sure we're moving forward on that. That part of it was the part of it that I liked better than this part, because there isn't really a nexus between your property taxes and this bond rate and using the streets in terms of users. A transportation management fee, we based what we're looking at was based on how much did you use the streets, and I think that's much more equitable, and there's a better nexus there.
Mike?
Interesting. Kurt and Mark and the staff, and certainly the committee volunteers, thank you very much. good work at being able to manage this process so well that it's so uncontroversial in any way at council for us to move forward and get things done. Good job. I agree with the secondary attachment B list. I know you mentioned just now that we're going to move into another discussion here shortly, but I wonder, and this is a very specific question and request, do you know if County Farm Road is a city road between Coburg and the city limits? That's a city street, yes?
Could you be more specific?
Yeah. I believe it's Coburg Road. Right. I don't know for sure, but it's easy enough to find out. I can follow up later this afternoon.
I'm wondering if we can have a more serious discussion about something we've asked for a couple of times, but I know this is certainly a priority, which is a kind of a strategic plan for dealing with unimproved roads. That's one of them. And there is currently a low-income housing project that butts right up to that. There is a very large group of very tightly clustered townhomes that's butted right up to County Farm Road. There's another proposed 101-unit low-income housing development proposed to butt up, as well as another 163-unit multifamily, all proposed for a very short space, butted right up to an unimproved road. And I have some concerns with safety and impact there, and I would hope that we're looking at that right now as we're looking at these other potential developments, that we're tracking along with that particular road, because I think it could be a real problem if we're not. More to the larger question, I'm hoping that we have a strategitic plan for dealing with the city's unimproved roads. Do you have any comments on that?
I could, or if you want to.
Well, okay. Yeah, I think some of the conversations Kurt and I have. So whether or not it's a county road now, it will be a city road at some point, and it's also designated. I'm not sure if it's a major collector or an arterial.
It gets a lot of trucks from Wildisham.
Right. So it's a higher functional classification than local street, and so there is a plan already in place, and that's the 6-year capital improvement program where we improve arterials and collectors through that system and fund the city share through system development charges typically. And the one project in the 6-year CIP is Jefferson Acres. So the problem on that program is there's not enough funds to fund the city share of those projects. So we have a lot of arterials and unimproved arterials and collectors and not a lot of money to fund the city share of it. And then on the local side, the discussion has been more, we have this over the last several years, been funding pavement overlays on unimproved, primarily local streets. Some was from the general fund, and now we've projected in the 6-year forecast of the road fund that we'd be able to do that, I think, to about $250,000 a year, which doesn't, by the time you get to the last of the unimproved streets, the ones that were first done would be long since broken up again. So one of the ideas is that we would go through, do that one time with the understanding that the next time the road needs work is that would be the time to implement a local improvement district to improve that local street to city standards. That would help address some of the projects in the pedestrian bicycle master plan that will come to you next month. And also with the council subcommittee on the street assessment policy and the action that you all took earlier this year, some of the inequities in the street assessment policy have been addressed. So again, the idea would be we'll continue the maintenance overlays on unimproved streets with the idea that that's a one-time proposition, and a full improvement would be the policy after we to continue that work on unimproved streets.
So the work is to identify a funding stream predominantly?
Right, and that could be tied to that larger discussion about the improved streets and look at the transportation system as a whole.
Okay. Thank you very much.
George, you want to put the motion on the table?
Sure. I move to authorize the additional streets shown on attachment B to the list of streets to be repaired with bond measure proceeds.
Second the motion.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please indicate. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and none in opposition, it passes. Thank you.
Good day's
So,
work, you guys.
ready for the next part 2.
Okay, sure. So with any luck, we have a very brief public service announcement queued up here that we'll be the world premiere of here today.
It's not pictures of the stool again, is it?
No, sir.
Oh, good.
No.
And a button.
So whenever you're ready, just go ahead and run that.
As promised, the street maintenance bond measure has fixed major streets throughout the city. I think these improvements have been a great investment for our city. I'd like to thank the voters for approving it. We've been able to really do a good job and we actually fix more streets than was initially planned.
Nice.
Yeah, so there you have it. Roughly 30 seconds. And
That is your new stardom.
I'd really like to thank Janet for being the star in that. But I rolled that out for a couple of reasons. First, that's the first time it's been aired publicly. It's loaded on the website and will be made available to the media today to run as a public service announcement at their convenience, to continue what we've talked about through the duration of this, which is telling the story of where we've been with this. That said, kind of adding on to the conversation we had here before, it is certainly appropriate to celebrate the successes we've had with this. It's equally as important to remember that we're a work in progress. The backlog remains at a significant number, and there's work left to be done. So as Mark indicated in his presentation, believe it or not, time has flown, and the measure that we're currently working with was passed just about 3 years ago by the voters. It was a 5-year measure, so the last installment on the property tax statement for that measure would be actually in the fall of 2013. We've heard through informal conversations as we've talked about this topic that there's some interest in renewing this measure when it expires. You might recall that initially it was contemplated as a 10-year measure at a larger number and rolled back to try it on for size to see how it worked. In fact, earlier this year we visited about the prospect of the Street Repair Review Panel continuing in their role and actually helping advise where we go from here. That's been a group that has been productive, insightful, passionate about the work that we're doing, and frankly very helpful to us in presenting information to you periodically. So we would like to take advantage of that. I think there's going to be some questions to be answered on the near horizon. I suppose first and foremost is do we wish to renew this measure and continue with property taxes and bond measures as an element of our longer-term plan. If we do wish to renew it, then when would that be done, and how large a measure would it be, and for what term, and what would the project list look like, and all the things that were a part of the current measure. So today, absent objections from the council, we would propose to move down that path with the Street Repair Review Panel, and specifically work with them over the next several months with an eye toward leaving open the possibility of renewing this measure next November 2012. The rationale for that would be that we understand there actually will be a general election next November, so it accommodates itself to adding a measure onto a ballot that already exists. It would provide some continuity, I think, tacking on to Mark's comments of getting this B list adopted today in anticipation of that work being done nearly 2 years from now. There is a time and distance involved with putting these projects together. Having the measure re-upped next year provides that period of time, so there would be continuity on the project side. At the same time, there would be neither a gap nor an overlap in assessments that come out on the tax statement. The the manner in which our finance staff has structured the bond measures, it works essentially as a line of credit, so there would be none of the next measure included on a tax statement until the first one had paid out. So our rationale is to get that back to you sooner rather than later and provide a set of recommendations to you shortly after the first of the year for having a more formal debate on the merits of a 2012 fall measure sometime late winter or early spring. That's what I have on that topic. If you have any guidance or suggestions today, we can take that. Again, otherwise we would reconvene this group and head in that direction.
Thanks, Kurt. George Poley?
Well, I think the timing issues that you brought up are all good points. I think it's a good approach to how to move forward on the timing. As far as the actual bond measure itself, I think we need to stay consistent with what we set out with when we first started this discussion. We're going to do 5 years, see how we do, and then do another 5 years. I think we also need to stay consistent with the guidelines that we placed on this bond measure as far as the reporting and the accountability and the purpose and the use of the funds. The only thing I can't address is how much. And that's because when we first discussed this, we were talking about all these projects, and I don't remember if we were using the value of the dollar then, or 5 year or 10 years in the future. So, the amount of the projects is kind of up in the air. We've been able to add some of those projects that were put off onto this first 5 year group, so the dollar value may be essentially the same, but I think it'd be hard for us to go anywhere beyond what we thought we were going to need to put out for the second 5 years. And the other thing is that to make it any more than what the first 5 year bond measure is, I think, might be more difficult to get it passed by the voters. A lot of people will look at a bond measure and say, okay, so I've been paying X amount for this to occur. It's been occurring. I'm okay with not paying any more, but going ahead and continue on with another bond measure for the same amount, because I'm not seeing that money right now. Again, however, under the current economic times, that may not hold true. So I think we have to be real careful on the dollar amount.
Okay, next is Chris, and then Alan.
Thank you. I basically agree with a lot of what George is saying, because I think what these bonds are built around is the public's faith in us. And their faith has to be based on us being logical and reasonable and thoughtful and deliberate. I think that's what we've done. I think the committee confirms the fact that that was the case. And I think everything that I hoped would happen with these bonds did happen, which is what reinforces, I think, the ability for us to go back to them again as long as we go in a thoughtful way. Not asking for more than you can work with in that period of time, I think, is a critical component of it. I think that was part of what made the last one effective and attractive. So I'm absolutely in support of going back out again. And Alan and I are, I guess, the two counselors who were still here that were on that transportation subcommittee. And so I would reinforce what he was saying about the notion that this bond was part of a larger strategy, and we need to have that continuing conversation. I'm incredibly proud of all the players, the staff and the city council, that basically took an out-of-control situation and brought it some semblance of security and stability. Yeah, there's still a lot left to do, but I'm incredibly proud that we and you had the ability to take this unbelievable problem that had been talked about for decades and actually brought it under control. I don't want to stop doing that. We can't stop doing that now. We've got to keep moving forward. And so the bond measure is one way to continue to do that. And we absolutely, positively have to keep going forward with that. What other strategy we might want to put in place, I think, is a good conversation. We need to talk about what it is, as long as we're demonstrating that faith I talked about at the beginning. I think it's reasonable for us to go to the public and say, as long as we're spending your money wisely and you are getting a return for it, we would like to keep coming and asking if you will continue to support us. The economy is a factor. We've got to take into consideration where the economy is. But people also drive on these streets, and losing a tire, losing an axle, losing a part of your car in a pothole is also an expense. It's a cost to people, and they have to figure what are those different costs. So the work you've done so far is great. There's still a lot more work to do, but yeah, we need to celebrate along the way, and I think we have not lost faith with the public. I think we've done an extremely good job of keeping faith with the public.
Alan?
Yeah, I agree with what both Chris and George have said. I'm of the opinion if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and this fits that category. I think going out the same way with the same elements and the same strategy is a good thing to do. I'm in favor of moving out. With regard to the amount, I think if we can play this so that or propose this so that it goes out as no change, people pay no more, no less, I think that's very sellable, given that what we've seen so far is a tremendous value for what people have put out in terms of the vote. And I think we did such a good job of implementing it. I think we earned people's trust in doing it this way. We did exactly what we said we were going to do, and in the time frame. In fact, we did more. We just approved $7 million more streets than we thought we would be able to do. So I'm going to declare success and move on and say, let's do it again.
Thanks, Alan. George Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I just wanted to say that, this is one of those areas where the city and Public Works did exactly what they said they were going to do. When they asked for this bond measure, trust us, we're going to use this money wisely, and it's happened. And people can see that it's happened. I mean, I see it every day when I'm driving around town. It's like, wow, this road is so nice and smooth now. And it's just, it's a wonderful feeling, and that's happened in every part of town. So, it's a way to gain trust, and the city did that. And so I think we should keep it going and have craft a measure for the 2012 ballot. In such a way, maybe the amounts will be a little bit different because maybe tax revenues are less, but to keep it so people aren't paying more. Try to structure it. It may be a little less money coming back, but yes, I'm all in favor of Public Works working with the citizens group to move forward on this and craft a way where it's pretty much falls in the same ballpark as what people pay for it. I think that people will support it because the results so far have been just like we promised, and that's really important. So, yeah, I say move ahead.
I think that people didn't like seeing our infrastructure investment sort of going down the tubes. I think that was a very bad feeling for the community, and you hear all over the community as they see the road repairs taking place, and even the more potholes being filled, and even the not full street fixes that are happening. And it makes everybody feel like the investment in our community is a good one, and that's a positive feeling for the community. I really appreciated the video and the telling the story. I think that's a really important piece that we need to keep on doing, and I hope that not only will the group continue, but they'll continue being advocates, because I think the breadth of those folks are good voices to speak about this out in the community in ways that we can't do, so they really add to what we can do. And I agree about no additional burden. I don't know, as we look for other ways to deal with the backlog, I think we're in a pretty tough time now, so we'll just have to navigate that as we move along and see when it makes sense or not. So, and I think it's important for us to convey that sort of being aware of people's financial situations, but also realizing that you don't want to lose the investment that you already have, and you want to be able to maintain the things that make people lives be able to function. So I think those are sort of winning arguments. George Poling?
Well, just, I think maybe during your discussions, I don't want to hamstring the Public Works people and the street repair review panel to say, okay, we have to work within this dollar amount. So, during the discussions, if there's some different options that float up to the top, bring those back to us, let us look at them, and if it does go over the magical number, that's okay, I want to see that. I want to see how much it goes over and what else are we getting for that additional whatever amount. So, I don't want that group to be so hamstringed that they can't think outside the box.
Thanks for that, George. Pat?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wasn't fortunate enough to be on the council that did the initial work on this, or on the committee that was alluded to by Councillor Pryor, but thank you very much for the work that you did to bring the city to this point. I was principal for a day this morning at Calapooya High School, and they asked me, one of the kids asked me, what does the council do? And I thought for a moment, I had a two-part response. I said, well, if you watched us work, most of the time you'd look and say, oh, why do those people do that? But sometimes you'd watch his work and you'd say, oh, why do those people do that? This is one of those areas that falls in between. This is something that if you listen to people talking about it, it may seem to someone on television that it's pretty cut and dry, pretty dry and boring. But in reality, this is what we do. We make roads better, and we hire a professional staff, or we have a professional staff to make sure that the public's money is spent the best way it can possibly be spent. I've watched this from the back corner of the room and now from this table, and it really is astounding the mileage that you got, the bang for the dollar that you got out of the work that everybody at this table, other than me, did. And I, as a community member, thank you all for the work that you did on that. And it really is amazing that you got far more than anybody expected. So thank you.
Andrea?
Thank you, Mayor. Lucky Pat gets to sit at Calapooya. Did you notice the nameplate on the wall?
Best high school in town.
Yes, it is. One of the two. That's not why I got in the queue, sorry. Actually, this conversation kind of reminds me of the conversation we had yesterday at our Budget Committee, Human Services Budget Committee that we had, because really when you think about social equity, this is really another piece of what the city does. Pat talked about Calapooya, but he talked about unimproved streets. And like in the Train Song area, I think it was, or was it Councilor Clark? I'm not sure. One of you two. Okay.
But I agree, at one time or another.
What I was thinking, though, is that some of the areas don't want to be improved. In Train Song, all those streets are dead-end streets. They just don't want, 5x5 potholes, that they have to drive through. So, and really, when we can't, I'm assuming we don't charge them for those overlays. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, but yet their quality of life has improved. And I think that this is another example of the type of work that, we're trying to strive to improve the quality overall of everybody's life. And I do agree with the conversation around the dollar amount for the bond to go out. I know Bethel has done that historically in the past, where they just try to continue on the same level, not more, not less. So I think it's very wise. So thank you very much.
Just to wrap up this conversation, this is a time of year when I get all these letters from Marist students where they want you to respond they're asked as part of a class assignment to send me a letter and bring up an issue and ask for a response. And I would say 90% of those have to do with roads. That almost always the questions they ask are, I'm driving to school and there's a big hole in my road, or my family is complaining about the street we live on, or whatever. And so sort of over and over again, I get the opportunity to talk to them about explaining the matrix, about why we make the decisions we make to save money, that you fix streets that are not in as bad condition as some that you see, because you won't then have to do the total rebuild, and it'll save you money in the long run, and it'll protect the investment that you've already made. And yes, we can fill potholes, but we don't expect they're going to last very long. It's just something that we do in the meantime. And then if you're going to do the big rebuild, it's a big amount of money, and that just has to get in line in the big line of money projects. And I'll tell you that every time I explain it, people have an aha moment. It's just not something intuitive to them to think when they see X street and it doesn't look so bad, and this one looks really bad. Why are you working over here on this street? So sort of understanding that matrix in how you make your decision to try to utilize your funds and keep your infrastructure in shape and not have to do the bigger things is something that we can't repeat often enough. So I think that's just something that we have to keep telling people about in many ways. So thank you very much, and I think we're ready to, you've gotten the word that people are interested, right? And ready to move. Yep.
Good work, John. You should bring your award in when we have this contract.
Next up, we have a second important conversation and a second conversation about something that we have in progress, and that's the discussion on the Eugene Springfield Fire Service merger update. City Manager.
Turn over to the chief.
Mayor, Council,
Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to give you a routine update on where we are in the merger process. Just a quick recap. Going back to July 1st of 2007, we implemented the 3-battalion integrated response system, which was the first step in the process that basically blurred out the geopolitical boundaries between the two cities so that you get the closest and most appropriate response regardless of jurisdiction. It was the right thing to do, and it's performed better than we had anticipated, as I've reported before. Fast forward to July 1st of 2010, we implemented the next step in the process, which we've dubbed the functional consolidation, and that's where we have started sharing resources between the two organizations, going with one fire chief, one operations chief, one training chief, one fire marshal. The positions are listed on page 2 of the AIS at the top. We've actually gone a little beyond that in some areas where we find it makes sense with managerial positions. We've also entered into 2 signed memorandums of understandings with both firefighter unions, one in the EMS arena for allowing some of our support staff to work back and forth more efficiently across the city boundaries. The other one is just recently signed in the fire marshal's office, where we are trying to realign limited resources to be more efficient and effective in the way we deliver service. It allows us to look at some specialization, to tap into unique skills that both fire marshals' offices have that benefit both cities. We are right on the cusp of signing the 3rd memorandum of understanding, and that's in the arena of training. We're already doing a lot of cross-training between the two organizations, but we're trying to get to the point where we can use our represented staff in that area to truly work as a seamless one system back and forth as we move forward. We've also entered into an IGA, intergovernmental agreement with the City of Springfield for a joint recruitment and selection process for recruit firefighters. That's going on right now. That's saving both cities about roughly half the cost they would normally spend in a recruitment and selection process. In addition, this is anecdotal feedback, but I've received reports from a number of crews that we have had quite a few more ride-alongs from people from other fire service agencies looking at Eugene as a destination employer, which is a category we always seek to be at in the fire service, so you get the best and the brightest that are coming into the organization. Specifics as far as the financial savings to date, in the first year of the functional consolidation, we projected that we would save $562,000. We exceeded that and saved almost $607,000 in year 1. Year 2, these are annualized savings that move forward. It's projected in the $870,000 range, and that's shared between the two cities. At the same time, some of those reductions, part of them are attributed to the functional consolidation. Some of them have been staff reductions in response to the challenged and tight budget that we're living under in both cities. The reality is the line has become very blurred for my staff and me in that area. What you reduce from the functional consolidation saves money and is not something you can reduce in staff reductions, and vice versa. The reality is, though, at the end of the day, less is still less. It is producing savings, and we have been able to mitigate some of the impacts of a reduced staff by having shared functionality. At the same time, as we move forward, this functional consolidation phase, we've always said, is a 2-year part of the journey.
It's not sustainable long-term from the standpoint of having staff run back and forth between the two cities. The reality is if we can eventually end up as one system, one organization that's shared between the two cities, where we have one budget, one set of operating policies, one set of personnel issues, one contract for the firefighters, one contract for the service unions, where we have 4 right now. Running a department with 16 stations really is no more difficult than running one with 11 stations, and that's the premise we've been operating under. So that would be really the only downside I've seen at this point. The other piece I wanted to hit on was our battalion chief levels, which are our shift supervisors. Eugene has 2 on duty each day. Springfield has 1. 2 of them are responsible for 5 stations. 1's responsible for 6 stations. We've actually stepped up the process, and we've integrated those. We have some Springfield battalion chiefs operating in Eugene. We have some Eugene battalion chiefs operating in Springfield. What I really like about that is it's developing more consistency in the system. And day one of making those changes, the Springfield battalion chief walked into the Eugene office and said, "Why do we do it this way?" And it's forced some changes. And the same thing has happened the other direction. So it takes, I like to think we're being critical of our service delivery system at all times, but the reality is sometimes you need that fresh set of eyes to really give you a new and unique perspective. And that's been extremely valuable to the process. And so we're going to continue down those lines. Where we are today and what I see coming in the next phases, we've been actively engaged with our 2 city sets of support services. We have human resources meeting between the cities. We have finance staff helping to do the costing of what a merged contract might look like. And we have IT working on our computers and how we can work through our systems. There's still a lot of areas that we can be more efficient. For example, you walk into the training chief's office right now, there's 2 computers. One's the Springfield system, one's the Eugene system. We're trying to bring those together so that it's one. We had a series of meetings to do just that back in late August, and it was interesting. Both support staffs were surprised to hear that we had to dial 9 area code and the number to go back and forth just between our 2 offices. Now, it may not sound like much, but you add that up over probably 100 calls a day, it adds up. And that's just a simple example of things that we've been running into and trying to work through to truly integrate and have one way of performing all the way across the board. Steps for the future are, as I said, we're trying to cost out the labor contracts right now. We've had a meeting with both firefighter unions. We're starting with that work group because that's really the elephant in the room. Our support personnel are extremely important to what we do, but that is a very small part of our overall system. Over 80% of our people are line service delivery folks. Another 5% are in the fire marshal's office. So roughly 86% of our workforce are directly touching the public. And so that's the piece we need to work through first from a financial standpoint to make sure that this pencils out as we move forward. If you will go to the last page of the, the second to the last page, 3rd page of the AIS, we've laid out what we believe are the decision points as we move forward to decide whether or not this system continues to move forward to a fully integrated, merged organization or reverts back to 2 separate departments, although if we do that, there's a number of pieces that we will recommend that we keep in place, such as the 3-battalion system and some of the things that we do in training. And if we get to that point, we can discuss that further. But anyhow, the first point is we're evaluating the feasibility of a merged IFF contract right now. We will be meeting with labor this next week to try to start the process of seeing what we can do to bring these 2 contracts together and maintain cost containment. The reality is the cost of the contracts are not that far apart, surprisingly enough. So it's just we've incented in different ways, the 2 cities have over the years, and it's trying to see how we can normalize that. I will say labor has been a very good partner in this. I think they believe in the vision. They've witnessed firsthand the efficiencies and service effectiveness enhancements that they've seen on the street. It's made their world safer because we do deploy more units on a what we call ideal H environment, immediately dangerous to life and health, like structure fires, hazmat releases, things like that that are really our critical service calls that can affect more than just one or two members of our community, but broader numbers. So anyway, we will be assessing the feasibility of a merged IFF contract. If feasible, we will continue to step 2. If not feasible, we'll stop and develop a strategy to separate. Step 2, evaluate the likely comparables for IAFF to see if a merged contract changes that significantly. I do not believe it will, but we're still going to do the assessment of that. There's a finite number of comparables in the state already. We are limited by statute who we can compare to, so we will go through that process. And if feasible, we'll continue to step 3. If not, stop and develop a strategy for separating. Step 3, then, is to obtain a merged contract from our represented general service employees. That'll be a little more challenging because there's 2 separate labor unions between the 2 cities, but that's still, the statutes provide guidance for how that will take place if we get to that level. And then step 4, the cities evaluate the governance model and select a preferred model. And if the cities can agree, we go ahead and merge the entities, the 2 fire departments, under one organization with the 2 cities. And if not, we separate and find an exit strategy. So with that, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add.
No, that's
John?
great. Thanks.
That's just a quick update. I wanted to leave most of the time for you to ask questions or comment and hear your concerns or issues. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to, let's see, Chris, Alan, George. Okay. So let's start with Andrea.
Oh, okay, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. Excuse me. Thank you, Chief. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
So this is good stuff. We had received, I'm going to refer to a memorandum that you sent us on October 19th. But first of all, John, I'd like to hear your opinion of all this. I mean, do you see this as something that is doable? And what's your opinion about this?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I do. What do I think?
That was easy.
Yeah, actually, I'm very supportive of what the chief's efforts are. I'm very open to functional consolidation. I'm very open to exploring the idea of all the way to a special district. What, for me, the concerns, and the chief knows this very well, is it needs to work financially, and it needs to work operationally, and then it also needs to make sure that we're just providing great service to the community. I have no doubt on the service to the community piece of that. Operationally, I know they can make it work. There's still some outstanding questions on the financial piece that they're working through there, but I would echo what the chief has said. I think the labor unions have been very good partners with the chief working through that. We have a lot of folks on our rest of our staff. So very supportive of the work, very interested in continuing to have that exploration and eventually coming back to this body with a policy discussion on where you want to go in the, sort of in that final outcome.
Thank you, John. I appreciate your words because, you know, we look to you for the wisest words that we can do, that you can give us. So there's a couple things that I just wanted to ask about that was on the memorandum that you sent us.
Yes.
One of the things that I had heard anecdotally in my history from working in the ER was that each of the fire districts on their medic units have different supplies, so to speak. And I see here that one of the things that you've talked about was kind of implementing between Eugene and Springfield, you know, joint purchases.
Yes.
Is there an agency or a group that kind of oversees all that throughout all the fire districts, or does every fire district just kind of go and look for the best vendors?
Every agency manages that themselves. That's part of our vision, is to try to have a centralized purchase order and distribution system at some point. We're trying to work it out with the 2 cities right now. Interestingly enough, on that piece, when we started this process, we learned quickly that Eugene got a better price break on its EMS supplies than Springfield because of size and magnitude and economies of scale. Since we've had those discussions, it's forced us to go out and look even more critically at our contracts, and we have now found a supplier that both the City of Eugene and the City of Springfield, we're working with our purchasing divisions right now to go back out and have a whole new contract that saves both cities even more money. So it's a better price than even Eugene was getting. And that's the thing that's been interesting in this process. I wish we had time to just jump on everything at once, but we've had to take these things in kind of sequential steps because we have a smaller staff today than what we had as two separate departments, yet we're still running two separate departments. But I am very confident that as we continue to process these pieces and taking on a chunk at a time, we are going to find even more efficiencies. At least that's our hope, and so far it's proven to be true.
Well, that's good to hear, because what I really would like to hear down the road, personally, is a standardization of not only practices and purchases, but not only for Eugene and Springfield, but for the whole county.
Yes.
Because I think some of the small rural fire districts don't have the manpower or the opportunities or the ability to do the kind of research that our staff does around these kind of things. And so I hope that this is just like a small idea and that it grows and that we're able actually to help the other districts. And I mean, in the long run, it really does save money, not only for the cities, but for the patients when they don't have to change out like IV lines and different types of equipment that's used on the medic unit. So I'm excited to hear that.
And it does more than just save money. It adds field utility when you move from one set of equipment to another, and that happens sometimes. You're having to figure out, okay, how's this device work compared to the one I'm used to using? So there's a utility standpoint as well, and that is our hope. That is what we would like to do, and I think it's a good model.
Well, I appreciate that. And then also, I was trying to read this organizational chart that you put in that memo, and I
With a telescope.
I did. I needed to get this out, but I'm glad to hear that we're doing some cross-pollination of different of battalion chiefs. I think that that's really a good idea. Kind of gives opportunities for people to work in different areas, and that opportunity for them to see our world with different eyes, and so I applaud that part of it. And all in all, I'm really supportive of the decision points that you have worked out here. As long as the unions agree to it, I think that it's definitely a lot of the conversation in the direction we go kind of rests with some of their decisions, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Well, when it comes to the cost piece, absolutely, we'll need their cooperation, and so far, I think they've been wonderful. They've been good partners. They've had some good thoughts, some good insight. We've worked hard to develop a good relationship, regardless of the merger.
Okay.
And I think that's, and I would encourage you to talk to the labor leaders as well. I think they would echo the same thing.
Okay. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you, Councilor.
Now, I have Chris and Alan and George in the queue, but I just wanted to add something to that before then, and that is actually, since I'm talking broadly, sitting at this table, I'll say it to you, but I hope that folks from the union here, I think it would be nice if during the process we would hear from them about how they're seeing this process work. I think that would be helpful in getting us a whole picture and to reinforce what you're telling us. So it would be nice to hear from both sides, if we not sides, but both parts of the puzzle, so to speak.
Absolutely, and the union was going to be here today, but we have Scott Olmos, the president, out on a disaster exercise at the airport right now. Originally, this was scheduled for November 28th. An opening came up. We had our AIS ready to go. We were ready to hit the ground running, so we jumped on the opportunity. Well, we don't. If you know our department, we don't sit on our hands.
And the other thing that I think is important is when I talk to the public and I talk to them about what we're doing, the response seems to be very positive. I mean, they really like the idea of efficient use of of the scarce resources we have. So I don't think there's any problem with that. I just want to be sure, as we sort of work our way through this, that we find a way to check out with the public to be sure, because when I'm talking to people, I'm talking to individuals, and that's very different than what happens when we get to a decision point, and the public has to kind of respond and say what they believe or think about this process. So to me, it would be helpful if we have sort of points of sort of checking in with both in Springfield and Eugene with our publics to see how they're understanding this and to kind of identify anything that they may need to have more information about. So just
Very good.
for us to think about. And just wanted to say that I love the idea of our fire departments being a destination in place. That's a wonderful thing. So thank you. All right, Chris, you're next.
It's been kind of a good news meeting today. I like that, but the underlying element in the good news is that there's still more to do.
Yes.
There's still things we need to be observant of and work on. And I have always looked at the work you've been doing as kind of leading the way for what could be in a larger sense. And I agree with everything that the city manager says because I think that he also can see what the potential is. I think if it was going to happen anywhere, if it was going to be successful anywhere, the fire service is probably a great place for it to be because it is so mission-driven and so focused on the greater outcome. Selfless is one of the words that comes to mind, which is why you can demonstrate how this can actually work, and I'm thinking in the larger sense. I would feel terrible if I thought we had to move backwards, because I don't think we should have to move backwards. I think this is absolutely doable. What final form it looks like, I think is still very much in play. It could be this, it could be that, but the goal is to create a greater good. I know that gets overused, but the mission of the Springfield Fire Department and the mission of the Eugene Fire Department are one and the same. There's no reason why they shouldn't be together. Every Springfield firefighter and every Eugene firefighter that I ever interact with always are and say and do the same things. It doesn't make sense for them to operate separately because they are the same people. They have the same purpose. So it's just working through the detail work to get there, and that's where I'm saying I want to give you my full support for whatever you need to do to get there. And I know you want to get there in a cost-effective way. We can't assume a financial burden, and it can't be a problem, but I can't imagine that it would be. And I don't want this presentation today to imply that we're endorsing do more with less. Figure out a way to put this together so we can get off cheaply. It's not about getting off cheaply. It's about providing a better level of service in a better way to better serve the community. And whatever resources we need to do that are the resources we need to have, but we need to be very thoughtful about how we can make that happen. So I know I'm kind of talking in grand terms, but you're already doing the nuts and bolts work. I think what you need from us is our endorsement and our encouragement to keep going. You don't have to step back, and you don't have to look at, from my standpoint, having to give up or having this fall apart. I don't think it will. I don't think it can. And I'll do whatever I can to help you make it happen because it demonstrates what might happen in the larger sense.
Thank you, Councilor.
Alan?
So, good job so far, Randy, in getting this all done. I know wearing two hats has been trying at times for you, so my hat's off to you. The savings are just for FY11, just slightly better than what we expected, $607,000 versus what we expected, $562, with Eugene being $320,000. That's great. And then projected in FY12, $876,000 with Eugene share being $462. Is the FY12 on what we thought?
We're on track for that. I'm hoping to exceed that as well. I like to under-promise, over-deliver whenever we can.
We like that too.
So, has it gone as you thought, as planned?
Nothing ever goes exactly as you plan in advance, or very few things do, I should say. Change, I think, is hard, and this is pretty dramatic change. At the same time, I've watched people come along. There were people right out of the chute that were ready to back the effort and help lend a hand to it. There were those who kind of stood out and said, well, I'll see which way this goes. And there were those who, tried to stick the proverbial broom in the spokes of the bike. The third category, there's almost none at this point. There's a lot more in the first category. I think it just takes time. People want to see that something is going to stick. They want to see that you are serious about your efforts. I know with the two fire unions, we had a meeting here a month ago or so with the city managers and some key staff where the city managers backed this
direction that we're taking and trying to see if we can bring the two contracts together. And the unions both got very serious after that. Not that they weren't before, but it became more real. And I think every step of the way we go, it does become more real. I know that the firefighters on the street have seen the effects of the 3-battalion system and the surge capacity that we gain by having a larger system. They've seen that their margin for safety has increased. They've seen scene performance improve. And for them, that's where the rubber meets the road. You know, they want to be able to do their job to protect the public. They want to be able to provide for their safety while they're doing that difficult work. And this system has helped with that.
So, with the full merger, I suspect the big issues are the union issues, and predominantly around wages and benefits, in that the cities have different wage scales and different benefits packages. And if I remember correctly, Springfield's wages are just slightly below Eugene's.
Slightly below. There's an open contract on the Springfield side right now. Eugene's doesn't open until next year. We're hoping that the gap will narrow even further, but it's a very slight gap right now.
Yeah, and the benefits packages are pretty different.
Benefits packages are different.
How does that work when you merge?
That would be they would be under one package, and that's where the devil's in the detail of how do we work that through. There's meetings going on the rest of this week and next week where we have our human resources staff and our finance staff working on those very issues. So I'm hoping in a relatively short period of time we're going to have more to report back. At the same time, there is a lot of work that needs to be done yet. That's in our work plan. It's addressed in our strategic plan. We are proceeding until we hit a roadblock that we cannot get around. Mm-hmm. And like Councilor Pryor, I'm not anticipating that happening. At the same time, I can't tell you the exact path that we'll be on when we finally hit the finish line, but I'm optimistic.
So I'm imagining that moving forward that Eugene folks aren't going to be willing to step back to meet in the middle with the wages and benefits of Springfield. So bringing Springfield up to the same wage level and benefits package as Eugene has a price tag to it. I'm wondering how that plays out in the budgets. Right now we have 2 fire departments and 2 budgets. Mm-hmm. Springfield pays for their folks and we pay for ours. And if it ends up that their wages go up or a benefits package changes, that's in their budget. And we're not subsidizing that?
We're trying to set this up so neither city subsidizes the other, and I don't think that has to happen. As far as the wage differentials, again, it's very small. They're under current contract negotiations. Without getting into too much detail, I'll get into one just as an example. For example, in the city of Springfield, the firefighters get deferred comp. They do not in the city of Eugene. When you add that deferred comp back into the value of the wages, it brings them even closer. So again, we're not that far apart. Again, I hope I have the latitude to get in there and see what we can strike in the way of a deal to equalize without increasing the cost. We've produced savings on the managerial side. I think we can continue to do that. The other thing is if we can get under one roof, with the exception of the firefighters and the stations, all of a sudden we become yet more efficient, because right now we have 2 offices that we're maintaining.
I would just add a little bit to that on the financial side. The personnel costs are absolutely a big part of it, but it's not the only part of the financial picture, and part of what Gino and I have charged the chief with is take a look at this from a holistic financial perspective as we go forward. And so labor is an important part, but it's not the only part.
Yeah, it's a big chunk of it.
Right.
And then finally on the issue of the special district, City Manager, you mentioned that. Right, as it stands right now, that's not necessarily where I want to see us go. I'd want to see how that. I'm open-minded to it, but it really depends on the governance of it. I'm not. If a special district is something outside and more outside and is autonomous from the cities, in the council's direction, that's not where I want to see us go. If it's a special district that is still under the control of the city councils, that's more in line with what I'm thinking.
The special district is just one of a number of options.
Right.
I've got George Polling and Mike and Pat.
Well, Chief, thanks for all the work that's been going on in the background that probably people don't even know about. It's a tough job, and I think we're progressing along well. And I kind of have the same concerns as Alan about the new governance model, where that's going to lead us. And I think that we need to start, we being Springfield and Eugene City Councils, need to have joint meetings and start having some real hard discussions about that now, so when you get to step 4, you're not going to have to start from ground zero. Most of the work will be done for you. And I'm glad that you've put in there, if cities cannot agree, stop and develop a strategy to separate. I don't want to throw a wet blanket on everybody's warm fuzzy right now, but I think you should probably have that strategy in place when you're about halfway through at step 3, just in case. I've got faith that the two cities can work something out on a governance model, and I'm not sold on whether it be a special district or overseen by a committee of counselors or what. I'm open to suggestions on that, but I think that's something that we need to start having discussions right now. We meaning both city councils.
Thank you.
And before I call on Mike to follow up on that, I mean, one of the things we haven't talked about is whether you presented this to the Springfield Council and where they are currently on their thinking about this.
Yes, I have. In fact, that was one of the reasons I liked the opportunity to move our meeting up. I met with the Springfield Council about 2 weeks ago, and I gave them the same update. And it was, they didn't take a vote, but they took a head nod, and it was unanimous to move forward. There's some of the same concerns that I'm hearing here about what the form of governance is. And, the reality is, just to lay it out there, every step of the way, I've found if we don't hit each stepping stone on the path, people get very uncomfortable. And so we're just to that point. I would expect people to be uncomfortable with what this unknown form of governance, what is it going to be? From my perspective, there are a number of ways this can be successful. But before we launch that, although I think it's a good idea to get the discussion going, before we launch that, we need to make sure that we can bring this in at a reasonable cost and provide better service, which we're working on, and have that, make sure the functional pieces all work the way we think that they will.
It's sort of, in my view, kind of a chicken and egg thing. You don't want people worrying about some things that you might be able to get out in front of with your effort. On the other hand, you don't want to arrive having done all the work and not have people with you. So it's kind of a,
Yes.
I don't know the right way to do it, but I think it is sort of sharing information, hearing from each other, rather than trying to drive each other toward a earlier than needed decision. So there may be a way we can structure a conversation where we kind of say, this is what we've all heard, this is what we're all thinking about right now, and kind of, but not drive anybody toward where they have to be making up their minds prematurely. I guess that's the thing that I would
One of the takeaways I have from this process, and I think anytime you do something like this, you learn so much, is that as we proceed with this process, there's a lot of examples in other departments, other communities, where they have done the same thing and it's been successful. There's examples in other communities where they've attempted this same initiative and it's failed. There are no how-to manuals on this because it's kind of like getting a stock set of house plans. You still have to engineer it to your property. Well, that's kind of what we have here. I mean, there's nuances in both cities, and if we had a third city in the mix, there'd be nuances to that city as well. And so we're figuring it out as we go. I'm fortunate to have a very good staff, and they put a lot of hard work into this.
We appreciate that too. Mike, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor. It's unavoidable that change makes everybody uncomfortable a little bit. But as Chris mentioned, I think the tenor of the times demand that we innovate what we do and try to do it better and try to do it in interesting and new ways. And I'm certainly very thankful for the work that you've done to this point. I think it's been a phenomenal effort. I'm very thankful that we have you in place, frankly, and the current union leadership. One doesn't have to look too far into the recent past to see times when we've had other people in places in this department and elsewhere where this would have been much more difficult to try to do. And I think a lot of the credit belongs at this end of the table for the capacity to work together and try to come up with new answers. I'm real thankful that you're in that position. Like Alan and George mentioned, I'm not as concerned, frankly, with the labor negotiations because I've seen how successful you have been at that so far and how successfully the labor management has and leadership has worked with you. I'm much more concerned with the governance model. Like others, I have real hesitations with a special district. But I'm wondering, and it's been partially addressed here, I'm wondering from your perspective what we can be doing as elected officials to begin the process of even side discussions or working with the elected folks in Springfield in the same sort of effective manner that you've done so far to kind of start having the conversations that bring this along. I mean, if you have suggestions for us about how to do that, I'd be more than happy to hear them. So.
I feel unprepared to give you all advice, but what's worked for me, I always try to start with the relationships and work out. And I found if you've got that relationship built, you can tackle some pretty difficult issues and be successful. If you don't have the relationship, you can tackle very relatively easy issues and fail.
Very good point. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pat, you next.
You know, of all the things that I'm impressed with, Chief, one of the things the thing perhaps I'm the most impressed with is your way of taking something complicated and putting it in terms people understand. And you found the right terms for me. A stock set of house plans you have to engineer to your site. That really sums it up. You know, it's not been done before. You know, I think as far as the administrative details of running the department, I feel very comfortable. We're in good hands, and you're demonstrating through numbers and through on the job productivity that we are in good hands. I think the governance model I can't make any comments on that until I see much more information regarding what are the positives and the negatives of a separate district or some form of hybrid separate district. And I'm confident that the manager, that you guys will get together and give us the details that we need before we come to a decision point. To me, the big issue, of course, is going to be the unions and how the four unions, particularly the two firefighting unions, how we merge the two contracts. Having been in union negotiations, as Councillor Pauling, Councillor, well, you have all, we probably all have at some point. Knowing the details, you don't know what you're going to even be facing until you sit down at the table. And people have discussed with me the difference in benefits between Springfield and Eugene and the difference in pay between Springfield and Eugene. And the concern, of course, is always that we get the higher benefits and the higher pay wrapped into a package. And I know the negotiations will go slightly different to that. One thing that gives me confidence in that is that you're demonstrating savings already administratively, and by demonstrating that, you're creating an example that should carry forward to union negotiations. It's already being done administratively, and therefore it gives me confidence that the savings can be passed along in a way that benefit the union members and benefit the people, the taxpayers of Eugene. So thank you very much. I feel we're in very good hands.
Thank you, Councillor.
Andrea?
Well, I have a couple comments. Just the first one that I want to respond to, Pat. I think last time that our firefighters had their negotiations, I don't remember who I was speaking to with the firefighters, but they felt pretty comfortable at being at what they were. Did they not get a raise this last time, or
They signed a 3-year. They signed a 3-year contract with no pay increase. However, they did get Kelly days, which is that's a prescribed day every 18 shifts, and it's pretty complicated to explain. But basically, it's more time off.
Okay. So would you say it was kind of a wash?
I think it was a good contract for both sides. I think we found the sweet spot.
Yeah. So I just kind of have this feeling right now about unions that I think that they're aware of the economy, and a lot of unions traditionally who have fought for stuff are giving things up, and I think that I don't, that wouldn't be a reason, that wouldn't be a deal breaker for me. And the rest of the comments I have are for my peers on council. I think this is really a huge, broad conversation, and I would encourage you all, if you have time, to ride along with one of the medics, because they are dual firefighter paramedics, and kind of get an idea of what they're dealing with, and they have a conversation with one of them. It's a really good entrance to see how they work, their contact with the public, and what this means, and how the governance model that we're so concerned about really, I mean, we basically govern them, but how much connection do we have with them? How much do we know what we do? I've done some research, when Rural Metro came along, and I looked at their structure and how they started out in Arizona, and they had basically a governing board, and people that were their leadership were old firefighters and old chiefs. And so I think we need to educate ourselves about it. I'm not down the road with the district. I won't be the only one to say, I won't carry that water by myself. But I think that we need to educate ourselves on both ideas and not have concerns about it, because I think that really what we want is good care for our clients in our community, which we are a part of. And I don't think it really matters to the person at the time of their house fire or their medical emergency who governs what. They don't care what color the shirts are. They don't care what color the ambulances are. And so I just think that we need to really kind of have an open mind about this conversation, because it's a different day in the world. And I really think that the firefighters, and I'm really proud of our fire companies and our medics and our buildings. And when you said you were going to look for think about a joint building, I'm thinking you better not leave second in chambers. But, I think it's a different day. And I think we really kind of need, this is one of those things that this is an opportunity to really kind of look at it more globally when we think about how it interacts with the hospitals, how it interacts with the nursing homes, with our schools, with our communities. The expectations of the medics on the street. There's a video that the chief showed us at our last ambulance transport meeting, and it's just like, man, I'm glad we don't live down there, but that is kind of a wave that's coming. So I think we really need to kind of have more of an open mind about this, and I would really encourage you, they can do 4 hours, is that correct?
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, and you just and it's a lot of fun, and a lot of time the firefighters will feed you, and you can go to their kitchen and see their cool refrigerators and this huge stoves and stuff. And so I just kind of wanted to share that with y'all.
Best possible outcome.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to tag on to what Andrea said. Absolutely. When we had the joint ambulance task force meeting the other day, Andrea mentioned the video that the chief showed us. I actually went and spoke to him a little earlier. I'd like to encourage all the rest of my colleagues to watch that video. I think it is absolutely a fundamental education piece to understand the complete world that these guys operate in, especially as it pertains to EMS, and understand all the pressures that are on them. This particular video talks about the systemic problems in Los Angeles. But certainly, as the chief will tell you, we're beginning to see some of the same issues that they deal with, and we need to be better prepared for it, because they're having very serious problems in Los Angeles. And I'd like to encourage all of you to see that video.
Can we send that out?
We can set up a link.
Yeah, we'll set up a link.
Set up a link, yeah. The only thing I would say about
Go ahead.
The only thing I would say about it, the music was just a little bit too funky for even me. It was rap and Rasta and all kinds of, it's definitely LA-based.
I was not consulted on that.
And that's fine. It was just like, this is really kind of cool.
We can probably survive that. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Good conversation. And I do think we all have to sort of help you work through this. So.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Chief?
You should see that, too. That stuff is already here.